The upper limit of Geometry Dash makes it one of the hardest video games that is out there. Arguably the hardest. Harder than any of the Souls games, harder than the hardest Mario Maker challenges, and even harder than the Five Nights at Freddy's Max Mode challenge list. But just how hard is this game? How hard are the levels in this game compared to one another? And how does this compare to the difficulty of other popular games? We aim to figure it out in today's video. The first half of this video will be explaining the scale of difficulty in Geometry Dash, meaning we'll be showing how hard levels are compared to one another, from Stereo Madness all the way up to the hardest levels in the game. The second half will be me comparing the skill ceiling of Geometry Dash to other high skill ceiling video games and seeing where it stands. So sit back, grab some popcorn, and let's dive right into this. Now, this video is made for people in the Geometry Dash community and also people who aren't in the Geometry Dash community. So to start off, I'm going to give just a basic understanding of what Geometry Dash is, but if you already know, you can skip to the next timestamp. Now, Geometry Dash is a game that has a huge range of levels. There are millions of uploaded levels onto the servers, all of which have varying difficulties. Some of these levels can be beaten by an average person quite easily. Others, however, go beyond the difficulty that most of the game's own player base can't even fathom. Now, there are 6 different main ratings in the game, aside from Auto, which is an automatic level which requires no input to complete. The main ratings range from Easy, Normal, Hard, Harder, Insane, and Demon. The Demon levels have tiers of their own. So there's Easy Demon, Medium Demon, Hard Demon, Insane Demon, and Extreme Demon. Because Extreme Demon is the upper limit of difficulty with thousands of Extreme Demons, there's no surprise that Extreme Demons exist on a scale of their own. But we'll get into that later. Geometry Dash has 8 main game modes with a ton of objects in the game, which changes the way you use game modes. The first is the cube, which just requires a simple click. It is usually used to jump over obstacles like spikes and to gain height by jumping on blocks. The second is the ship, which you hold to gain altitude and release your input to decrease altitude at the same rate. Since the camera changes, the ship is usually used to make the player avoid spikes on the ground and ceiling, and anywhere in between. The next game mode is the ball, which simply rolls forward and switches gravity upon a click. The next is the UFO, which resembles the Happy Bird game by floating in the air and bouncing a certain degree with each input before heading towards the ground. Next is the wave, which travels diagonally upwards upon an input and loses that altitude at the same rate upon releasing. It is most people's favorite game mode, myself included. Then there's the robot, which is basically like an animated cube which jumps higher and for longer, allowing you to hold the input instead of just clicking. There's the spider, which instantly teleports to the ceiling or floor for each input. Finally, there is the swing, which travels in a curve upwards and downwards upon each input. The longer it goes unbothered, the faster it will travel either upwards or downwards. Now, those are just the basic game modes. There are portals, which invert your gravity or method of input. There's speed portals, which completely changes the difficulty and fundamental nature of obstacles. There are orbs, which you click on, which enact a certain physics alteration, and much, much more. With an extremely complex level editor, there are endless possibilities in terms of obstacles and combination of obstacles you can encounter. The editor is so expansive that you can even make your own mini game in Geometry Dash. So right off the bat, you have a bunch of game modes one needs to master or at least get comfortable with in order to progress most levels in the game. But let's start off with Stereo Madness. This is the beginning of our entry level section, which is composed of levels that, in my opinion, any normal gamer can beat within a day or so. We're starting off with Stereo Madness. This is one of the easiest levels in the entire game and is the first level you are presented with, which makes it one of the most famous. The decoration is simple and doesn't affect the gameplay since it was made so early in the game's life. It consists of a series of cube spike jumps and teaches the player how to increase their height by jumping on higher and higher platforms. It then gives the player a light ship section where the goal is to not hit the ceiling or the ground, giving the player a lot of space in between. I distinctly remember my cousin, who's 12 now, but I remember when he was 3 years old on an iPad, and he literally sat while I was in karate in the waiting room, and by the time I was done with class, he had beaten Stereo Madness. The next level that we're looking at is Dry Out, which is the 4th level in the base game of Geometry Dash. I can comfortably say that this is twice as hard as Stereo Madness, if not a little more. It introduces the invert portal, which is used only on the cube, in this level at least. It also has noticeably tighter ship gameplay, giving the player less lenience overall. Can't Let Go is the 6th level in the main game and is the first level to kind of spice things up in terms of difficulty. I'd be willing to say that this is twice as hard as Dry Out, as this is the first level which doesn't really hold your hand, but rather tests you. It tests your sight readability, or your ability to react to what's in front of you without practice, and just based on your sight. It does this by mixing in a couple of triple spikes, giving you a dark section, which also inverts your gravity. Finally, the level tests your patience in the sense that you now have to time your jumps to make sure you aren't jumping too early. In the previous levels, there wasn't really any penalty for jumping too early unless it was completely unreasonable. Now, you have to use your critical skills to determine when it isn't too early or too late to jump. I'd say the average gamer would be able to beat Can't Let Go within their first day if they're determined. Here's my friend playing the level.
There's no fucking way! Yo!
Now we'll get into small time investor levels, which are main levels that I'd say one would have to put a couple of days to a couple of weeks of playtime in order to beat. Time Machine is the 8th level in the game. Time Machine is notorious for being a jump in difficulty above the levels that came before it. Let's just say for consistency's sake that it's twice as hard as Can't Let Go, because it definitely feels as much to me anyways. Yes, it introduces the reverse gameplay portal, but that is seldom used in online levels, which is what we'll get into later. Time Machine is difficult in my opinion because of the way it casually throws around triple spikes, has blatantly more difficult ship and reverse cube sections, as well as you needing to make sure you don't jump too early in certain cases. Us GD players often overlook the difficulty in Time Machine, but to a new player, for instance, this is the first level I would say one would have to actually grind in order to beat. The next level I want to point out is Cycles. This is a bit harder than Time Machine, but not too much harder. This is because it introduces a new game mode, the ball. But honestly, the ball parts aren't too difficult in this level. It's again how the cube sections casually throws around triple spikes and obstacles which make you time your jumps on both ends of the spectrum, meaning making sure your jumps aren't too early or too late. Then you have inverted ship gameplay sections, which requires an increase of skill to pass consistently. It also introduces the flipped to normal gravity concept with the ship, which is something you'll see a lot in online levels.
Oh my gosh!
Let me see that work. How do you feel?
I feel exhausted, but I feel like I achieved something great.
Yeah, because you did. Electrodynamics. Let's get into the 15th level, Electrodynamics. It's a considerable step up as I've skipped some levels in between cycles and this. Now to make one thing known while I'm doing these scalings, I'm less so calculating the ease of which some people will be able to do this, and rather a reasonable approximation of level difficulty compared to the other. Let's say someone who jumps from cycles to electrodynamics, for instance, will have a harder time beating electrodynamics than someone who has played all 14 levels leading up to electrodynamics. I'm more so rating the difficulty of a level based on how complex the obstacles, clicks and concepts that specific level holds. That being said, electrodynamics is again a jump in difficulty. Let's say it's at least twice as hard as Cycles and maybe a bit more. As you can see, we are a couple of updates in the future, giving us new decorations and block designs. The most notable thing about electrodynamics is the speed increase. Now players will have to get used to increasing the speed and frequency of their clicks. The cube sections aren't that bad compared to what was previously shown, especially if one were to play the levels in between Cycles and electrodynamics. Where it picks up is the speed increase in the ship sections, forcing the player to develop a decent amount of control over the ship. This is because the level now forces you to curve your ship movements, swaying up and down to dodge obstacles. Then there's the UFO, which you must have a baseline understanding of how it works in order to comfortably get past the section. And then there's the triple speed sight read testing towards the second half of the level. You're now able to jump over quad spikes, which shows the concept of how speed fundamentally changes your gameplay, as it's basically impossible to clear a quad spike on the default speed. Electrodynamics really tests the player, forcing a new player to actually practice and learn the level before playing it from 0% and remember the parts. This is because the sight reading is on a whole new level, and overall this level tests you in ways you haven't been tested before. Here's YouTuber CoryX Kenshin beating electrodynamics.
Yes! Oh my gosh! Ugh!
Hexagon Force is the player's first run-in with awkward gameplay, which, surprise surprise, is a thing a lot of online levels have. Just wait until you start playing map packs. This level introduces slopes and duels. Dual ships, dual balls, and dual cubes. The slopes make gameplay feel less natural, and with the need to not click on some and click on the peak of others, it can get confusing. Also, you have to be aware of how each duel interacts, specifically by dodging obstacles with one cube, waiting a split second for it to reset, then dodging the obstacles with the other game mode. Even though they have the same obstacles, for the reason previously mentioned, technically the first duel a player ever encounters is asymmetrical, which are more complex than symmetrical duels, which this level also has. Other than that, the other parts are pretty mild. A lot of people are split in terms of which one is more or less difficult between electrodynamics and Hexagon Force. I personally think they're close, with Hexagon Force being a bit harder, but let's just say the same because my poll definitely disagreed with that. I say this because I think a player needs the same amount of prep and practice with both Electro and Hexagon Force. And now we're getting into the big boy levels. These are called demon levels, which is a kind of difficulty we are yet to go over. It isn't stated, but all of RobTop's demon levels so far are quote-unquote easy demons. I'd say a new player needs at least a few weeks to a month of playtime in order to gain the skill to beat one of these levels, with even a couple of months of playtime being considered normal. Anyone who beats these levels are dedicated Geometry Dash players who know and are comfortable with the basic mechanics. Club Step is the first level we're going to be looking at, which the game doesn't even allow you to play unless you have 10 secret coins, which, to be fair, isn't that hard to obtain. I'd say it's about 50% harder than electrodynamics. The main challenge is the learny nature of the level and the ship control. It tests your fundamental ability to control the ship while it is in normal gravity and inverted gravity. There are also UFO sections that just require raw skill, patience, and the proper execution of the click pattern. Finally, there's a difficult ending compared to the rest of the level, which tests the player's nerves, which, again, is something common in online levels, especially hard ones. Already, we are at the level of other games. I personally think working up the skill to beat something like Club Step is like beating an entire video game. The challenge of beating Club Step itself is like beating a hard Souls-like boss, and yet, we are at the tip of the iceberg when it comes to Geometry Dash. Theory of Everything 2. Theory of Everything 2 is the second demon in the main game. It requires 20 secret coins in order for a player to unlock. It's about 10% harder than Club Step in my opinion, so not too much harder, but much more complex. I mean, the level is called Theory of Everything for a reason. First off, the orbs are a lot less charitable in terms of when you can click them and not mess up your trajectory into where you need to go. Again, a concept online, yeah, you get it. It tests your fundamental competence with the ship by giving you tighter sections which casually change your gravity. The UFO sections are like the ones in Club Step, forcing you to find and execute the click pattern. The ball gives you a memory section, and the new wave game mode appears again. This one takes a lot more learning than Club Step does and is another grind for those newcomers. Deadlocked. This is the third and so far final Robtop Demon level. Deadlocked is meant to showcase one of the biggest updates in the game, Update 2.0. Therefore, a lot of new gameplay concepts have been added, such as the robot, the green orb, teleportation portals, and moving objects, just to name a few. Out of the 3 Robtop demons, this is widely known and accepted as the hardest one, with a GDDL rating of 5, meaning Geometry Dash Demon Ladder, which tracks the difficulty of demons of the same rating. I think it's useful for easy all the way up to entry-level extremes, and then the demon list does a better job of rating the difficulty from there. The pre-drop isn't anything too bad, just a bit harder than Theory of Everything 2's pre-drop, but the same concept of memorizing which orbs won't do you harm and such is still present. Then the drop wave is a big step up from anything prior. A triple speed wave corridor which then inverts your click pattern, then reverts it for a ship transition. I mean, after doing this and beating the level in almost 2 times speed, I'm used to it, but I can only imagine how hard this concept is to those first coming across it. Then you have the ship and UFO with moving objects. You get your feet wet with teleportation portals by learning the click pattern of the mini ball. Then you come across an easier cube and robot section. After this is a fiery cave section which first forces you to demonstrate competence with the tight ship and inverted ship gameplay, mixing in the teleportation portals. Then there's a boss fight, which requires you to dodge laser beams from an otherwise spacious UFO section. Then there's the infamous dual wave at the second drop, and then a memory ship section. The level then dies down and ends off easy. I'd say Deadlocked is a good 50% harder than Club Step. For reference, Club Step is a tier 3 easy demon on the GDDL. So those are the main levels. Of course, not all of them. I didn't include those that I didn't think posed a significant jump in difficulty or taught new mechanics. Once a player moves on from Robtop levels, they're probably either going to map packs or gauntlets. Please don't do map packs. Map packs are a pack or collection of 3 user-created levels. Each pack is of varying difficulty and offers stars and secret coins once beaten. The incentive behind doing these is that they give you extra secret coins, which allows you to unlock different icons. But because this feature was introduced to the game over a decade ago, they consist of old GD levels, which aren't really that good gameplay wise. Remember when I was talking about awkward gameplay? Basically all of the levels are of such and of old themes. The silver lining is that it gives the player a decent amount of experience with sight reading, memory, practicing a level, and even just raw skill. It's something that most of us have been through, but the more ideal way to go for new players today are the gauntlets. Like map packs, the gauntlets are a collection of user-created levels, but this time holding 5 each, and the difficulty of levels within the gauntlet varies a bit more than they do in map packs. Instead of secret coins, they just flat out give you icons, colors, and even death effects. Unlike map packs, these levels must also be completed in a specific order. This brings us to Sidestep, which I think is about 20% harder than Deadlocked. After a player beats Deadlocked, they're probably going to be drawn in towards the Demon Gauntlet, which holds 3 easy demons and 2 medium demons. 3 of these levels, in my opinion, are harder than Deadlocked, the first of which is Sidestep. Sidestep, by its rating on GDDL, suggests that it is one of the hardest easy demons in the game, and should actually just be a medium demon. Gameplay over time sort of evolved to be more flowy, quote unquote, which means that there are several short segments of different game modes across smooth transitions. Deadlocked and Theory of Everything, for instance, you can identify individual parts because each segment had a decent chunk of level time, like oh, this is the first wave, and then it leads into the ship section, and then the ball section, and then the UFO. Flowy gameplay is more like ship, ball, reverse ship, wave, dual robot, 2 seconds of ball, 2 UFO clicks, invert ship. I hope I'm making sense. Sidestep, although being rated the same at tier 5, is a decent chunk harder than Deadlock due to its learning nature. The way it throws you into inverted ships and inverted waves on the fly, having to learn that duel, and that ship that follows being harder than any section in Deadlocked. Alright, so now you're a dedicated Geometry Dash player. Here are levels I think you need at least a month to a couple of months of experience at the minimum in order to attempt, and even close to a year sometimes. We're going to be jumping straight into hard demons, as I personally think medium demons aren't a noteworthy step above easy demons in terms of difficulty. The most popular hard demon in the game is 9 Circles. Not only is it one of the most popular hard demons, it's one of the most popular demon levels in the game. It started the 9 Circles trend with its distinct pre-drop decoration and drop wave epilepsy colors flash. 9 Circles starts off with a decently tame cube section. It leads you into a tight ship section and a tight memory ball section. The drop wave is the most famous part of the level. For a hard demon, the wave section isn't that tight, but it's made up for by the fact that the visibility is not only poor, but impeding you due to the flashing colors. The level dies down with a tight cube section. In terms of hard demons, I'm not gonna lie, 9 Circles is an easy one. But as far as what we've previously gone over, I do think 9 Circles is over twice as hard as Deadlocked. The GDDL rating is over twice as high, and I'd say it's accurate and approximately is twice as hard as Sidestep. 2 popular levels that are on the hard end of the hard demon spectrum are Fairy Dust and Forest Temple. Fairy Dust is one of the first new iterations of the 9 Circles trend, following the same level format with a dark purple and pink color scheme. The wave sections have tight obstacles and is overall more complex than 9 Circles and is an obvious step up in difficulty. It is rated at tier 14 while 9 Circles is rated at tier 11. As for Forest Temple, created by the late player and creator Michigan, who was one of the first #1 players in the game, is a test of skill for all game modes. It is also a tier 14 level, which is Zelda themed. It starts off with a challenging cube section with creative obstacles meshing together triple spikes and ground blocks, often switching between inverted and normal gravity. Then it leads you into a UFO section, which if you thought the club step UFO was hard, good luck with this. After is a mini ship, which causes you to sway up and down. Then there is a wave where the visibility is poor. Then you have a mini UFO, which is more about remembering the click pattern than it is difficulty. Then you have a ship section, and if you played this in update 2.1, you would know that this part was bugged and made the level 10 times harder. Now it's relatively easy. The level gives you a robot and then a ball section before ending off with a cube similar to the one in the beginning with some fake walls. Overall, this is probably Michigan's most popular level and is the epitome of a hard demon. Now we're going to get into insane demons, which are the levels right underneath extreme demons. I'd say it would take a new player around a couple of months to a year of playtime and experience in order to beat levels of this difficulty. Levels like Deadlocked and Clubstep is light work compared to these, and for someone who has the skill to beat one, they probably find levels like Clubstep and Deadlocked easy by now. Of course, we're gonna go over the most popular insane demon, my personal favorite insane demon, and the first one I've ever beaten, and that is Supersonic. At tier 17, it is an undeniable step up from the likes of 9 Circles and Fairy Dust. In my personal opinion, this is over twice the difficulty of 9 Circles due to its mix of complexity and raw skill. I'll rank it as 65% harder due to this poll of mine disagreeing, so we'll just go with the tier rating system. But overall, this level is not sweet. It starts off as a ship section which switches from normal to flipped gravity, while having to deal with entering the portals at an awkward angle. The next wave section is pretty wide open. The mini UFO that follows requires a click pattern, but isn't too difficult. The visibility is poor in that section though, I will admit. The next sections you have to deal with timings, forcing you to a specific portion of the orb to line you up correctly for the next obstacle. This is a concept harder levels will take to the absolute extreme. Then there is a wave section, testing your raw skill. The following section is a slow and tight ship section, which leads to a 3x speed wave section, and upside down, and then nasty duel, which is pretty complex. The duel brings you into another duel, which is infamous for giving you a bad transition into the next part. The level then has you perform some semi-advanced wave gameplay compared to what we've gone over previously. It switches back and forth from normal to mini wave, and then you get a memory ball inspired by the one in Theory of Everything 2, except there is no visual difference between the real and fake blocks. The final part is one of the hardest in the level, mixing orbs with portals so you can counteract the physics of the portal, allowing you to progress into the next part. Never mind the fact that there are some fake orbs as well. The last part is a tight and awkward ship section, which is like the concept of the very first part, but much harder. When Supersonic came out, it showed what a hard and complex level looks like, and beating it was no easy feat. AlexPayne24 made a video completing this level, which currently has 4 million views on YouTube. Some other noteworthy insane demons include Windy Landscape, which is a bit easier than Supersonic, known for its light music and complex yet fun gameplay. Now let's take a look at our rankings. In a viral Geometry Dash video, Vortrox explains how Space UK's first demon level was Decode and how his second was Windy Landscape. Popular YouTuber Moist Critical, who was reacting to that video, said he had no idea what that means.
Now, I want you to guess what his second demon was. Probably the Nightmare or the Lightning Road, right? Wrong. His second demon was freaking Windy Landscape, an insane demon. And right after that, he got a quote-unquote 77% fail.
So here's the picture. Decode is an easy demon with a tier 4 rating, which means it's easier than Deadlocked. And Windy Landscape is slightly easier than Supersonic. So here's the difference in scales. Yeah, that's a big difference in difficulty. It turns out that Space UK was a hacker, and it was one of the biggest scandals in Geometry Dash history. But if that jump from Decode to Windy Landscape was made, that's pretty fucking impressive. For reference, Decode has a harder sequel level called Decode X, which is a hard demon, meaning its harder sequel level isn't even as hard as Windy Landscape. Then there's Acropolis, made by Zobros, the same creator of 9 Circles. This is one of my least favorite insane demons, by the way. That aside, Acropolis is about the same difficulty as Supersonic, both being rated at tier 17. It's known for its slow, claustrophobic gameplay, and is a test of raw skill, patience, consistency, and nerve control at the final wave. Then there's Ultrasonic, the sequel of Supersonic. Although given the same rating at Insane Demon, this is a step up from Supersonic with more advanced and complex parts, faster paced gameplay, and new concepts like the swing copter. The last Insane Demon level we'll go over is Ice Carbon Diablo X. Here is where we can finally get into the history of the hardest levels in the game. Back when it was released, it was seen as impossible, and with the lack of game optimization and powerful hardware back then, it pretty much was for players. It wouldn't be until an entire year had passed. This was done by Riot, who is one of the most important Geometry Dash players for reasons you'll hear later. This wasn't the first top 1, but it was the first mainstream top 1. With its complex gameplay combined with awkward and tough ship segments, it's intimidating. It gives off a club step but 100 times harder kind of vibe. Nowadays it goes in and out from being considered an extreme and insane demon, but let's get me started. To me, it's very clearly an insane demon and isn't even the hardest insane demon I've beaten. However, it's definitely on the higher end of the insane demon spectrum, being rated as tier 20. Now we're going to get into entry level / early extreme demon levels. These are extreme demons that a player who are crossing the extreme demon threshold will take on the soonest. This is because we are now entering extreme demons, meaning every level at this point is an extreme demon. However, as previously mentioned, there are thousands of extreme demons and they exist on a large spectrum of difficulty. There are some players that say the difference in difficulty between Stereo Madness and a beginner extreme is less than the difference between a beginner extreme and the hardest extreme in the game. And you'll see just how crazy that statement is soon. I'd say the average new player would need anywhere from over a year to 2 years of playtime and experience to take on an entry-level extreme. And when we see players who've taken anywhere sooner than 8 months take on an extreme, that's considered pretty impressive. Easy extremes are levels below the top 600 in my opinion. Levels that were once the hardest in the game, but because we've evolved so far beyond that, they are now considered entry level or easy extreme demons. Enter Cataclysm. This is the first level on the list I personally have not beaten yet, but I plan to use it as a break level in the future. That being said, rewind a couple of years back and nobody would be talking sweet about Cataclysm. Instead of me using it as a break level, it would probably be the hardest thing that I could do in any game. We are well past the point of games like Elden Ring, Cuphead, Dark Souls, Five Nights at Freddy's 5020, and so on. This is real life difficult. In update 1.9, a level called Cataclysm hit Geometry Dash. It was not only harder than Ice Carbon Diablo X, but was hell themed, making it more imposing and far more intimidating. This level would actually start the trend of making the hardest level in the game hell themed or of a dark red color scheme. Cataclysm is known for its tight wave and ship sections along with having complex memory gameplay. Coming in at tier 21, you can see the sharp difference in difficulty compared to the other levels we've gone over. It was hack uploaded by G-Boy in January of 2015. Many tried to claim victory of the level by uploading faked or speed hacked completions, but the first legitimate victory was by a player named Jiren. Then there was, you guessed it, Riot, and another player named Sandstorm. These were the top players back in the day. Before all of them though was a player named Cyclic, who later turned out to be a hacker. But at the time, he was also deemed as a respectable top player who beat Cataclysm before all of the aforementioned players. So Cataclysm had its victors by May of 2015. Right after Riot beat the level, he, along with other famous players and creators, made a level heavily inspired by Cataclysm, only much harder. This level turned out to be one of the most popular and important Geometry Dash levels of all time. And this level is of course Bloodbath.
Oh my god!
Made by not only Riot, but G-Boy, who made Cataclysm, Jiren, who is the first victor of Cataclysm, or technically the verifier, and creators like Michigan, who is the #1 player in the game at this point, Evasium, who helped make Supersonic, Edster, who is a popular creator, and more. It would take Riot, who is arguably the best player in the game at this point in time, a grueling 3 months and 25,000 attempts. The video of his completion currently has over 8 million views on YouTube. But what I think is even more substantial is the fact that it is the second most popular demon level in Geometry Dash and the 6th most downloaded level in the game with 100 million downloads. This level displays a new threshold of difficulty and reigned supreme for over a year, with nothing even coming close in terms of difficulty for many months. Many tried and many failed, with no one really coming close to beating it until 7 months later. A player named Quasar was the first victor of Bloodbath in an intense race against Serve, who got second victor. Just to give you an idea for how hard this level is, most people used lower end hardware back in the day, as more expensive hardware back then was much more new and expensive than it is now. So most people use monitors with 60 Hz refresh rate, while Riot was using one with 120 Hz refresh rate. If you want, you can look at this video I made or several other Geometry Dash videos which explains how refresh rate and frames per second drastically impacts your ability to play Geometry Dash. Most people who were trying to beat Bloodbath were playing it in 60 Hz. making it significantly harder than Serve and Quasar, who were playing it the same way as Riot, with 120Hz monitors. This, on top of their outright skill, were the main reasons why they were the first to beat this level. So basically, Bloodbath was so hard that it made players switch to better hardware in order to not just beat, but get progress on it reliably. 10 years later, it is a tier 24 Extreme Demon, 3 whole tiers higher than Cataclysm. For me, it took 1.5 years to get the skill to go for Bloodbath, on top of me playing casually and inconsistently for 10 years. And on top of that, it also took me 25,000 attempts and 6 weeks to beat Bloodbath on an even newer 240Hz monitor. I don't even call it an easy extreme, but an early extreme, because Bloodbath is actually real life difficult. This level is a behemoth and etched its way into Geometry Dash history. I don't think there are games developed as is that are even comparable to the difficulty of this. I think gaining the skill and being able to beat Bloodbath is the same challenge as beating some of the hardest Mario Maker levels or a ridiculous platinum trophy like Super Meat Boy, but in terms of Geometry Dash, we're not even at the halfway point. So, what came after Bloodbath? Sucoup Hell is a level built by Nubus, who was a popular Geometry Dash creator. It was built around the same time Bloodbath was, and was considered just flat out impossible. Nubus was open about hack uploading the level, so RobTop deleted the level from the servers. A year later, in August of 2016, a player by the name of Trusta verified a nerfed version of the level, which is the Sucoup Hell we all know of today. It was the first rated level that was harder than Bloodbath, and ended its year-long reign as the hardest level in the game. As someone who's beaten both Bloodbath and Sucoup Hell, yeah, Bloodbath is hard, but Sucoup Hell is just a different kind of experience. Despite it being only 50 seconds long, it took me 10 weeks and 42,000 attempts to beat it. So what makes it harder than Bloodbath despite it being more than a minute shorter? So basically, it has fast-paced wave gameplay with extremely tight and uncomfortable gaps. The wave gameplay is so disproportionately difficult compared to anything a player who just acquired the skill to play Sucoup Hell has seen before. On top of that, the level is filled with not so great transitions and having to deal with the fact that it's super hard to get consistent at many parts of the level. At tier 25, it's a decent step up from Bloodbath. What is also a decent step up from Bloodbath is even harder than Sucoup Hell. It's a level named Phobos. Phobos was a level that actually came out before Sucoup Hell, and because of its inaccurate placement, is a retrospective top 1 level. This level was a mega collab, but its publication was a mess, with the host of the collaboration hack uploading it to be rated and then deleted. But in May of 2016, like Sucoup Hell, a nerfed version of the level got beaten legitimately by a player named CrazyMan50 and then rated. It wasn't placed at number 1, but at this point in time was truly the hardest level legitimately beaten in Geometry Dash. Just like Sucoup Hell and Trusta, the completion of Phobos would kickstart CrazyMan50's career, who would go on to be a famous Geometry Dash player and creator. The level is basically a longer and harder concept of Bloodbath in terms of it being a long mega collab, although the gameplay is more complex. Hearing about levels like Phobos and Sucoup Hell existing when Bloodbath did and being even harder is like hearing that there were theropod dinosaurs bigger and meaner than the T-Rex, like I said in another video, or that there's stars way bigger than our sun. As I'm reading this part of the script, Phobos is currently the hardest level that I've beaten. Hopefully by the time this video gets out, that won't be the case anymore. But going forward, because of that fact, I've recruited the help of a top Geometry Dash player. Denny is an extremely talented top player who has completed many and has experience with the hardest levels of this game. It sounds like you've been doing this life shit for a little bit.
Alright, well, thank you, man.
Yeah. Going forward, he will give you a more detailed estimate to how these levels stack against one another, and he's much more qualified than I am, by the way. Now we're getting into the hard stuff. Things that a casual Geometry Dash player would never be able to do. Beating these levels for most comes at the expense of years of practice, experience, and honing in on skills and overcoming previous mind-breaking challenges. I'm not going to estimate how long it would take an average person to beat levels of this difficulty or harder, as it now varies greatly from person to person. In terms of Geometry Dash, it isn't anywhere close to the hardest of the hard, but if you beat these levels, I bet you feel like a secret agent or an undercover superhero whenever you do go outside. It must feel weird having this much skill at something and then walking around like a normal person. We're now going to get into Artificial Ascent, and I'm just going to use this level to bridge the gap from Bloodbath, Sakupin Hell, and Phobos to where we're heading in a minute. Artificial Ascent is a techno-themed level, which is again another mega collab made by many famous players. It beat Sakupin Hell and held the top 1 spot in December of 2016.
I'd say Artificial is probably like twice the difficulty of Bloodbath. Maybe a little less. I'm not sure because I haven't played Artificial that much, but that seems pretty fair.
With a tier 28 rating, this is a big step up from Phobos, Bloodbath, and Sakupin Hell, but it's considerably easier than what it was replaced by. Insert the RGB series. The red, Yatagarasu, is basically the Bloodbath of Update 2.0. It's a long, hell-themed mega collaboration between famous players and creators set out to be the hardest level in the game, and Yatagarasu accomplished that task. Remember Trusta, the verifier of Sakupin Hell? Well, he's also the verifier of this monstrosity. It took Trusta, who was one of the best players at the time, 4 months and over 50,000 attempts. The completion of this level would gain over 3 million views on YouTube. Yatagarasu requires an elite level of competence with all the game modes, on top of the fact that the level runs for almost 3 minutes.
I've done a couple runs on both of them. I haven't beaten either of them, so this is a bit of a rough opinion, but I'd say maybe Yata's like 1.5 times harder, so maybe like a 50% difficulty increase, maybe a little higher. I think it's fair to say that Yata would be at least like 3 times harder than Bloodbath, maybe a bit more.
This level marked the end of the 2.0 era, being verified in January of 2017 and automatically being placed at the number 1 spot on the list. The next level in the RGB series is the green level, Erebus. Erebus was made by a creator solely to see how difficult they could make a level. It was designed by Irel and decorated by popular creator Rustum, who also did work in Yatagarasu. It was then verified by a player named Boldstep in March of 2017. Making it the first top 1 level in Update 2.1. The Toxic Wasteland themed level was verified in 47,000 attempts and in 3 months. As you can tell, this level is a beast, with complex and uncomfortable gameplay said to be even harder than Yatagarasu. Now getting into the last level of the RGB series, the blue level, Sonic Wave. So remember Cyclic, back when Bloodbath was verified, he had a rivalry with Riot. This is because Riot and Cyclic were seen as the 2 best Geometry Dash players at that time. Part of their rivalry consisted of each of them making a very hard level and verifying it. Riot obviously hosted the creation of and beat Bloodbath, while Cyclic made a dark blue 9 circles themed level. It turns out that Cyclic was a hacker, but his level, Sonic Wave, garnered so much hype that top player Sonix, who wasn't only a top player but was arguably the best player at the time, went on to verify it in late 2016. This would take the top 1 spot before being dethroned by Yatagarasu. Sonic Wave is a 3-minute 9 circles themed level with extremely tight wave gaps going at full speed. It makes the gaps in Sakupin Hell look like a joke. Now, the RGB series is composed of the previously mentioned levels and is significant because each level was a top 1. The order at that time in terms of difficulty from easiest to hardest was Sonic Wave, Yatagarasu, and Erebus. However, as time went on and more people started to beat the levels, the actual difficulty of the levels showed, and it was the complete opposite. The whole time, Sonic Wave was the hardest level in the series, while Erebus was the easiest. This is what I meant by the GDDL now becoming unhelpful, as Sonic Wave is rated at tier 30 and Yatagarasu is rated at tier 31, despite Sonic Wave being the harder level. Although, some people do say that Yatagarasu is in fact harder than Sonic Wave.
I think people saying Sonic Wave is harder than Yada is it's more of like an old school opinion, because back then a lot of people were playing on 60 hertz, and I feel like Yada's gameplay is a lot more playable on 60 hertz than Sonic Wave. On CBF, I think Yada is definitely harder because one, it's longer, it's learnier, there's more choke points probably. If more people played, then I think Yada would be generally considered harder.
But the general consensus is that Sonic Wave is the harder level.
Me personally, I would say Sonic Wave is easier than Yada Garasu, but I know some people who would say Sonic Wave is harder than Yada Garasu. I'll just go by general consensus. I'd say that Sonic Wave is probably like 20% harder than Yada. It's not that far ahead based on general consensus.
Now we will go off of the actual demon list. Right now we are in the legacy list, the top levels of years ago. So right now the hardest level we have gone over is Sonic Wave with a demon list rating of approximately 253 at the time of the recording, meaning there are 252 levels harder than Sonic Wave. Yet, look at how far we've come. Now we're getting into the ridiculously hard stuff, the real deal. For other games to compare in difficulty, I'd say either becoming a pro at a multiplayer game or beating world record speedruns. These levels are no joke, and it gets to a point where it is hard for even some experienced players to fathom the difficulty of the levels, let alone non-Geometry Dash players. So we're going to start off with a famous one. Bloodlust.
Okay, this is where it's like, I'm not going to be extremely accurate on it, but I'd say Bloodlust is probably like 4 times harder than Bloodbath, or maybe 5 times harder. That's getting to the point where it's not that useful to know that, because now we're getting into stuff that was recently on the list. So obviously Bloodlust is significantly harder.
With the video getting 12 million views on YouTube, it's fair to say that this is one of the most popular Geometry Dash challenges, completely outclassing Sonic Wave in difficulty, being over 100 levels harder. Bloodlust at one point in time was seen as the pinnacle of the game. If you couldn't tell by now, Bloodlust is a remake of Bloodbath, an ultra buffed, redecorated Bloodbath with an extension which makes the level almost a full minute longer. After being in verification hell, Nobbleboy verified it in February of 2018. It took Nobbleboy a year and a half, 120,000 attempts, and over 1,000 hours of playtime. I personally have 1.2k hours of playtime on Geometry Dash PC, just for reference. So he spent almost my entire career verifying this one level. It was worth it though, being one of the most popular extreme demons in the game and further pushing the limits of it. To this day, it is seen as one of the most important Geometry Dash levels in the community. It was so hard that, just like Bloodbath, it held the #1 spot for over a year.
The reason why it's so much harder than Bloodbath is the fact that there's a lot more choke points. So let's say like evasion in Bloodbath is pretty easy for most people. That's like a break part. But evasion in Bloodlust, it's actually like a choke point. Like you have that extremely tight buffed wave part, which is actually like pretty difficult in standards to list demons today. Like that's a crazy wave part for back then. So I think it mainly comes from just the length and the amount of choke points that are added within Bloodlust compared to Bloodbath. Cool. I'd say Bloodlust is maybe like 2.5 times harder than Sonic Wave, or maybe like a little more, a little less. So it's pretty subjective. Like some people could even like think Sonic Wave is comparable to Bloodlust, which is pretty ridiculous, but some people are just not that good at Wave. And I'm a Wave carried player, so I definitely find Bloodlust significantly harder than Sonic Wave.
After Bloodlust's tirade of being the hardest level in all of Geometry Dash, something had to eventually take its place. And with Bloodlust being so difficult, you would think a level only slightly more difficult than it would be able to take its place. But no, the first rated level that surpassed Bloodlust in difficulty is a level by the name of Zodiac. Not only was it harder than Bloodlust, it was a lot harder than Bloodlust.
Okay, I think this is probably a bigger jump than from Bloodbath to Sonic Wave. I think Zodiac is probably like twice the difficulty of Bloodbath, or Bloodlust. Sorry, I said twice as hard, but like, you gotta think about it. It's like 2 times the difficulty of Bloodlust, and that level's already very hard. So It's a big jump, so we're getting like to levels that are actually like really big achievements to beat.
This level was verified by Technical and held the #1 spot for almost a year.
That level is like extremely deceptive and like with its difficulty. It's similar to like Tidal Wave. You think, like, you look at the gameplay, you're like, okay, it looks kind of, I feel like I could do that. It looks like easy extreme gameplay. And then you go to play it and then you realize there's just some bullshit clicks in the middle of the level that completely like throw all of your runs. So there's just choke points littered throughout the level. For one, it's also extremely boring. You have to sit through like a 25-second pre-drop or whatever to like get to the even remotely exciting part of the level. I think Zodiac is mostly a mental challenge rather than a mechanical challenge. So I think that's why, like, where Zodiac gains a lot of its difficulty. Like, doing runs on Zodiac isn't really that hard, but when it comes to playing from zero, where you're just sitting through the boring ass pre-drop over and over, I think that's where most people, like, they realize and that they can't do it.
There are also some levels of this difficulty that are noteworthy. The first of which we're going over will be Kinos. Kinos is probably more known for its verifier's reaction than for the difficulty of the level.
Absolute degenerate behavior. Yes, I know. But the good part about this is it became a meme. I'm joking, by the way.
With it being just about the same difficulty as Zodiac, verifier Nepesta spent over half a year and 130,000 attempts verifying Kinos. This reaction went viral and was memed by people outside of the Geometry Dash community. Even the most subscribed YouTuber at the time, PewDiePie, and Lessons in Meme Culture reacted to his reaction. But I feel like not a lot of people can fathom the insanity of the accomplishment that completely warranted Nepesta's reaction. To give you an idea of what Kinos is, it's basically what Bloodlust is to Bloodbath for Sakupin Hell. An ultra buffed Sakupin Hell remake with not only an extension, but a beginning section which begins before Sakupin Hell's remake. And we know that Sakupin Hell is harder than Bloodbath, so it only makes sense that the harder version of Sakupin Hell is harder than the harder version of Bloodbath. Here is the scale of the difficulty so far. Finally, there's Kiris, which does for Erebus what Bloodlust did for Bloodbath and Kinos did for Sakupin Hell. Although there is no extension, it's just an ultra buffed remake of Erebus. Although levels of this difficulty were the hardest of the hard 5 to 6 years ago, it's not the case now, being in the extended demon list. That means that these aren't even in the top 75 hardest levels in the game anymore, which composes the main list. Don't worry though, we're getting closer to the top. So what comes after Zodiac difficulty levels? For these levels, you need to be godlike in terms of skill, determination, and have mastered perseverance and input precision. These levels will not be accessible to 99.9% of the people who have played Geometry Dash. The levels in this category are close to impossible to beat without certain hardware or software demands. This is due to a lot of inputs being so precise that they contain frame perfects, which is where on certain frames per second values, you only have one frame to input or release an input and not die. Getting back to Riot, he decided that he would do a similar thing that he did with Bloodbath, hosting the creation of a level which would be the hardest one in the game. Although this time it's 2020, and the level that was created was named Tartarus.
Yeah, like the first like big bad level to me, like the first level I was actually kind of scared of was probably either the Golden or Tartarus.
This level was designed to be almost humanly impossible and was an open verification for the entire Geometry Dash community. Like its level name suggests, the theme of the level is hell. It has a total of 29 60 FPS frame perfects. Yes, the frame perfects don't determine the difficulty of the level, but it just goes to show the difference in scale. For reference, Zodiac has almost none. But the cool thing about Geometry Dash is that some obstacles don't even have to be frame perfects and are yet harder than frame perfect obstacles in the same level. There are also numerous types of frame perfects. For instance, a frame perfect with the wave is considered much easier than a frame perfect with a cube or a ship. It took almost 2 years, but in January of 2020, a player by the name of Godlike verified Tartarus after 61,000 attempts. He uploaded the video on YouTube, which received 5 million views.
I think this is where like the levels are kind of like, they're getting to where they're a little interchangeable. I mean, Zodiac is definitely easier than Tartarus in my opinion. Tartarus is the less mentally taxing level, more of the mechanically challenging level, and Zodiac is kind of like the opposite of that. So I think Tartarus is like 30-40% harder than Zodiac. Like I think they're not that far away from each other. Like it's not like a jump from Zodiac to Tartarus.
Tartarus remained the hardest level in the game for a year and 5 months, making it the longest reigning rated top 1 level in the game's history. There were some levels that came out that were harder, but it would take years for players to make this realization, as people weren't good enough to compare the levels with one another. Imagine gapping a level like Zodiac in difficulty. I mean, look at the scale that we're at already. The Golden is a famous Geometry Dash top 1 that was said to be even harder than Tartarus before opinions changed and placed it below Tartarus. It has around 22 60 frames per second frame perfects with very tight wave and ship gameplay amidst a dark green background. Sonic Wave Infinity, or SWI, is a super buffed, redecorated version of Sonic Wave. This level ended up being harder than Tartarus, but its difficulty wasn't realized until years later. Look at Sonic Wave and how difficult that level is. Imagine someone making a super buffed version of that level, as if it wasn't hard enough. If you didn't realize, the last 3 levels are red, blue, and green themed, which actually compose the new RGB series. Tartarus being red, the Golden being green, and SWI being blue.
I'd say doing the entire new RGB compared to the entire old RGB, it's probably like, I think it's maybe like 4 or 5 times harder, because that's like a bunch of actually really hard levels now, like maybe even more than that. Tartarus is really annoying, as in the pre-drop has a bunch of like really hard gameplay, and then you get to the drop and it's not that difficult until you get to 31. Like you die to only like a few spots when you're playing Tartarus. Like you don't die all over the level. You usually die to like a handful of positions in the level. So I think it gets annoying for people to play, especially when I was playing it. SWI is surprisingly like accessible if you can beat Sonic Wave. Like the gameplay is basically the same. It's just significantly buffed. It cuts out a lot of the like room for error in Sonic Wave, but it's still like, if you know the Sonic Wave click pattern, you can still play SWI to some degree. I guess from Erebus to the Golden, it's maybe like 6, 7, 8 times the difficulty, something around that. It's definitely a much bigger gap than any of the other levels in there. Yada to Tartarus, it's probably like around the same, probably like 6, 7 times harder. Like obviously it's really hard to like imagine in your mind how much harder like 6 times harder is, or 7 times harder, so it starts to mean less.
At this point, in order to help people beat levels more efficiently and just to provide quality of life changes to the game, FPS bypass and mega hack are normalized, being able to make it so your game ran as though you had a 240 or 360 FPS screen, was what frames per second bypass was. And it was basically needed, as playing in 120 and certainly 60 FPS was not the viable option if levels of this difficulty were being beaten. These are the levels that, in my opinion, you'd have to be gifted to a degree in order to even attempt. I don't think you can just work your way up to these levels from the bottom with pure grit and dedication, right now at least. You'd either have to spend multiple years and thousands of hours to be able to attempt these levels, or you just have to be gifted in some sense. People literally bring up the conversation of genetics when it comes to being able to play levels of this difficulty. For reference, Denny, the top player you've been hearing from, the hardest levels he's beaten are in this range. We're nearing the top, and the levels of this category are super difficult for most professional players today. These levels demand so much from a given player that most of today's pros use a mod called CBF, or click between frames, in order to help them beat levels around this range. In fact, the hardest level beaten in under 240 FPS without CBF is easier than these levels, meaning it is not yet possible to beat these levels natively without your game running at 240 FPS physics.
That's impossible. This is something I don't know how people do that.
I like Slaughterhouse because to a non-Geometry Dash player, just looking at this level will give them an idea of how hard the game can get. This level is nothing short of brutal, even to the standards of pros. With its showcase getting over 25 million views on YouTube, this top 1 level marked the start of a new era. Imagine gapping a level like Tartarus, a level with 29 60 FPS frame perfects. A level that reigned supreme for almost a year and a half. With its dark, red hell themed 4x speed, tight and complex wave gameplay, along with its straight flies, intimidating atmosphere, purely insane obstacles, Slaughterhouse is known for its straight up brutality. It doesn't hold anything back, giving the player 65 60 FPS frame perfects to clear amidst what is considered a slow, boring, and mentally taxing experience by pros. It instantly held its top 1 spot when it was verified by Geometry Dash Prodigy Space UK in 2021. That was what we thought, at least.
I thought Space was hacking, like, when he was doing that. Like, I thought there's no way that a human can do that. And I was right. The verifier of Artificial Ascent, his name is Combined or Combi or whatever. I don't know how we came into contact, and then we were both like, dude, that guy is so sus. And we started pointing out like multiple errors like in his video where, like, let's say some clicks were just silent or like delayed or they seemed off. I won't say the name, but we went to a Lismon at the time. We presented the stuff and they literally just completely like brushed us off. Like they basically ignored us. Eventually, like I was like, okay, if Space isn't caught, if he's not getting banned or anything, it's been like months and months since he verified Slaughterhouse, he must have been legit. So, and then I started becoming like a Space Glazer because I was like, dude, this guy's legit, and he's like the best player that's ever played the game by far. I was definitely shocked because I realized that my accusations back in 2021 were actually like true.
This is why Space UK hacking was such a big deal. Look at how hard this level is, and the hype the community had around seeing it be legitimately verified.
I'd say Slaughterhouse to Tartarus, it's like, I think the list moves pretty exponentially, so I think Tartarus is like twice as easy as Slaughterhouse, maybe 3 times as easy. But realistically nowadays, anyone can like beat Slaughterhouse if you beat in a hard enough level. It's like the most accessible top level nowadays because it's just so simple. Everyone knows the click pattern for it nowadays mostly. It's not that learny. Slaughterhouse has kind of dropped in difficulty in recent time. I'd still say it's at least like twice as hard as Tartarus, maybe like 2.5 times.
So in my experience, this part is called River, and it is commonly referred to as the hardest part of Slaughterhouse. Now, I've attempted it, and personally, that's 5 seconds of Slaughterhouse, and I poured about 50,000 attempts into it and still haven't gotten past it. I mean, it's not like I've tried, I just wanted to test it out, but in my personal experience, River, 5 seconds of Slaughterhouse is harder than Bloodbath. That's just my own personal take. But I mean, that should just go to show how hard Slaughterhouse is. This level is so hard that it stayed in the top 10 for a little over 3 years. Although it was ever so intimidating and incomprehensibly difficult to some, it would be overtaken by a level a decent chunk harder. Acheron is the unofficial sequel to Tartarus. It is again similar to Bloodbath in the sense that it is a Riot project, where Riot and other popular creators banded together to make the most difficult level in the entire game. Acheron actually ended up staying #1 on the demon list for even longer than Slaughterhouse, at over a year. In 2022, Zoink, who many say is the best player right now, verified it after 70,000 attempts. Acheron would then get its first victor, Doggy, who beat it in 121,000 attempts. I like how Doggy is the verifier of Slaughterhouse and Zoink is the first victor of that level, and Zoink is the verifier of Acheron and Doggy is the first victor of that level. Thought that was just some Geometry Dash lore that I thought was funny.
If you're comparing 2.1 Acheron to 2.1 Slaughterhouse, I'd say 2.1 Acheron's probably like 3 times harder than 2.1 Slaughterhouse, or maybe like 2.5 times. With CBF both levels, I'd say CBF Acheron is like not even that much harder, I'm not gonna lie, maybe like 50% harder than CBF Slaughterhouse. Here's why. When you Acheron is like very famously known for literally just being a choke point simulator, so there's just several random clicks in Acheron that are way harder than everything else. Like think about the 31 click, the first click of the level, the 72 ship, that really hard ball in the last 10%. All those are just extreme choke points that you die to pretty regularly when you're playing the level. 2.2 just completely demolished the difficulty of the ball, but that's because of just general ball physics changes. On 2.1, if you're a frame late on a click, you die. But let's say you clicked at the exact same time on 2.2, your game doesn't wait until the next frame to go and die, it just clicks. So you're not gonna die late. You have more time to click late than you do to like click early. So the clicks become easier, so those extremely tight clicks are nerfed by CBF. The waves are nerfed, so there's a really hard wave before that ship. I'd say the only real similar game mode between the two versions, or like between CBF and no CBF, is like ship. But the level overall just nerfs all the choke points. Some choke points just become completely obsolete, and 2.1 is just very unforgiving.
For reference, I'm gonna put this next to Stereo Madness. I mean, you can tell that Acheron is way more complex and has way tighter obstacles than Stereo Madness, one of the easiest levels in the game, but you can't tell how hard it actually is. Look at this first jump. I'm going to do it in practice mode. Look at the window of time. I'm holding before I even spawn in so the cube will jump at the soonest possible instant. You see how close these two spawn points are? The one on the left is too short and will result in a death. And the one on the right is too far and will result in a death. That's how precise the first jump is. And it's only that, the first jump. So when you see people beating this level, just know that it being a lot harder than it looks is an understatement.
What the fuck? Who recommended me this fucking game, oh? Who told me, bro, are y'all fucking, who the hell y'all think I am?
Silent Club Step is a level with probably the most history. It's an old level said to be humanly impossible, made all the way in 1.8, so when Hexagon Force came out. Back in 1.9 or early 2015, Zobros, the creator of 9 Circles and Acropolis, was also one of the best players in the game. He played Silent Club Step in practice mode, and it took him almost 1,000 attempts. By 2016, the world record on the level was an astounding 6%. For reference, that's literally just the first couple of jumps. This level is so hard that the people who were going for it were looking to see who could beat it in practice mode in the least amount of attempts, instead of actually trying to make progress on the level in normal mode. Sonix, right after verifying Sonic Wave, attempted Silent Club Step in practice mode, and it took him 495 attempts. In 2020, the level was updated so that it was actually possible to beat with the new game physics, and in 2022, it finally was beaten by Paco. It took her almost 138,000 attempts, and it instantly became the hardest level in the game. At least, it should have. With the hype around Slaughterhouse and other levels, Silent Club Step was rated top 4, when in reality, it was harder than the 3 levels placed above it. First of all, look at how far the community has come, verifying a level said to be humanly impossible for 8 years. But secondly, look at how hard Silent Club Step is. It was made 10 years ago, and when it was verified, it instantly became the hardest legitimately beaten level in the game. Because it was released before Acheron, but was rated after, Silent Club Step was a retrospective top 1 similar to Phobos. So basically, levels around this difficulty are as difficult, if not more difficult, than levels deemed to be humanly impossible not too long ago.
I think beating Bloodlust twice in a row is much easier than beating Silent Club Step. I don't know how many times you'd have to beat Bloodlust in a row for it to be considered like Silent Club Step difficulty, but definitely like a couple more than 2. Twice in a row is like relatively doable, like not even close to Silent Club Step.
Do you think it's like twice as hard? Not necessarily like twice in a row, but do you think like it's at least twice as hard as Bloodlust?
Oh, way more than that. Like I think Silent Club Step is probably like 5, like maybe even like 10 times harder than Bloodlust, bro. It's like, it's crazy. With CBF, Akron is much easier than Silent Clubstep, but on 2.1, Akron is much harder than Silent Clubstep.
The only other thing in gaming that I can see coming close to this are super hard speed runs, being the best of the best in a popular multiplayer game or other high skill ceiling games. And even at that, that's a huge if. And I'm willing to bet that these Geometry Dash levels are the harder challenge for a person who, for instance, has played neither game. Our second to last section and final section of difficulty scaling is going to be one labeled how. Only the best of today's pros can attempt these levels, putting a gap in levels like Silent Clubstep, Slaughterhouse, and Acheron. These are the most current top levels in the game, and put levels like those previously mentioned to absolute shame. Tidal Wave is basically 3 minutes of waves of Slaughterhouse difficulty mixed with complex and extremely difficult sections with other game modes. It's a 3-minute beach themed level verified by Geometry Dash Prodigy and current #1 ranked player Zoink in late 2023.
Like you had to have been like a year at least ahead in skill to be in that level when it like Tidal Wave was like a year like ahead of where it should have been verified, to be honest. Tidal Wave is so much harder than Acheron. Like it's not even like, I can't even put it into words like how not close it is. Tidal Wave getting verified definitely, like, people are like, oh shit, like we're not going to be able to beat something harder than this for a long time.
To give you an idea of how inaccessible this level is to most humans, here is a player named Top DN1 Bust. He is a person who beats levels in the range of levels that I called the hard stuff. He currently has 35% on Tidal Wave after 2.1 million attempts.
Tidal Wave, it's a really good level. I think for the difficulty that it is, it's great. Probably the most fun top 1 level we're probably gonna have. Like, I think it's only down from here. Doing it from 0, that's a different story. Getting to like 39 on Tidal Wave, I'd compare that to Slaughterhouse. And then you get to 43%, so you get to the beach part. That's like around Kuki, maybe a little easier. So like 46 is around Kuki. You get to the second drop. Maybe that's around like AOD or Tunnel of Despair, maybe Spectre. And then I'd say if you get to the 62 part, or maybe the middle of the 62 part, that's around like Silent Clubstep, so like maybe around the 60s, that's like Silent Clubstep. You get to the 72 part, that's like Acheron. As you go through the 72 wave, you just get up and up and up on the list like exponentially, so you just move up. Every click you do, like the level just gets harder.
If this level was rated instantly when it was beaten, it would have been the longest reigning top 1 ever. It spent 623 days being the hardest legitimately verified level in the game. During that time, only 4 people in total beat it, with Zoink verifying and 3 victors. Imagine the first wave being something you need to be consistent at and get past a good portion of every time you attempt the level. Well, that's hard to do when the first wave alone is harder than Bloodlust.
Just the first wave is probably like as hard as one of like the lower levels on like the list, lower wave levels, so maybe like low main list or something.
Remember when we were talking about frame perfects? Well, Tidal Wave has 200 of them. So on 60 FPS, it's basically not possible for a human to beat, and we can pretty much assume the same for 120 FPS for that matter. Lots of professional gamers in multiplayer games like Call of Duty and Fortnite use, or used to use at least, 120 Hz refresh rates during their reign as top competitive players. For instance, a lot of Fortnite and Call of Duty professionals today have been professionals for a pretty long time, meaning that they've gotten a decent chunk of their earnings while using 120 frames per second or hertz monitors. Yet those monitors don't even produce enough frames to play Tidal Wave reliably, let alone beat it. This is why CBF and FPS bypass are a thing. That's how hard these levels are.
Well, basing it off 2.1, I'd say 2.1 Tidal Wave is about twice as hard as 2.1 Acheron. But if you go on CBF, I'd say 2.2 CBF Tidal Wave is probably like 4 times harder than 2.2 CBF Acheron, or maybe 3, I'm not sure.
Amethyst is a level which was verified by the other Geometry Dash prodigy, W Popoff. After its long reign, Amethyst was the first rated level which was harder than Tidal Wave finally dethroning that monstrosity. This is currently the hardest level beaten without CBF, although it is rumored that Zoink's project that he verified on the same day as Amethyst, coincidentally, Thinking Space 2, may be harder than Amethyst. There are like 5 people in this earth right now that are good enough to get decent progress on both levels and can determine which one is harder than the other.
I also did a practice run of Thinking Space 2, and that's like, that level is terrible. Like, it might even be harder than Amethyst, I'm not sure.
Amethyst is described as a level where every single click is a nightmare, with over 160 frames per second frame perfects and over 120 FPS frame perfects. We can kind of see the increase in difficulty with that factor alone.
I'd say like Pop-Off thinks Amethyst is significantly harder than Tidal Wave. I think Amethyst is probably like maybe like 50% harder than Tidal Wave, maybe like a little less. Like I don't think it's like a jump, like a huge jump from Tidal Wave to Amethyst, but I think it's significant enough to where it's pretty obvious that Amethyst is harder.
Grief is the unofficial sequel to Slaughterhouse, while sharing a verifier, Doggy. This level to some makes Slaughterhouse look like an easy demon. 75% of this level is said to be harder than Tidal Wave. Mind you, Doggy is a top player who already verified Slaughterhouse and has beaten Acheron. He is currently over a year into Grief with over 300,000 attempts. Grief has 237 60 FPS frame perfects and 11 120 FPS frame perfects, which just goes to show you how insanely difficult this level is. In fact, this level is so hard that Doggy, one of the best players in the game, is using CBF to verify it. According to the rules now, a level must be verified without the mod in order for it to get rated. But Doggy doesn't even care. The level is so hard that he refuses to verify it without CBF. And even with CBF, the experience of playing and beating the level is harder than the likes of Tidal Wave and Amethyst and Thinking Space 2 without CBF.
I've played Grief like here and there, but I'd say obviously it's harder than Tidal Wave, yes. And I think it's harder than Amethyst, yes. Let's say like 75% harder than Tidal Wave is like Grief. Oh yeah, I don't think anyone's really realistically in the future is gonna beat Grief without CBF. Like I think people will try, but I don't think anyone will actually be able to because it's just ridiculous.
Once this is out, this will be the hardest legitimately verified level in the entire game, but we are nowhere near stopping. W Popoff is already working on and has progress on a level named Vehemence, which is said to be even harder than Amethyst and Grief. So that's it. That's the current scale of everything in Jamshadash. Let's take a look from start to finish. Alright, just to recap with some additional context, this is Stereo Madness all the way up to Cycles. You can beat these levels fairly easily, most people can within a day or so. Then you have Time Machine, Cycles. Once you hit Electrodynamics, then the game becomes an actual challenge to people who just picked it up. And then Club Step and Theory of Everything 2 and Deadlocked is an additional jump, and that will take a pretty decent time commitment of a couple of weeks at least to most people who just picked up the game. And then you get into Sidestep, which is beyond the main game, so this is probably after you've beaten the main game. And then you have the likes of Ultimate Custom Night 5020, and that's the hardest base Five Nights at Freddy's challenge, so a really big achievement from another video game. And it's sandwiched in between Sidestep and 9 Circles, so 9 Circles is a bit harder, Sidestep a bit easier. I'd say UCN is about as hard as a medium demon. And then once you get past 9 Circles, you have Sekiro, which is one of the harder Souls games. And this includes everything from like the beginning to being able to beat something like Inner Ishin. So that's at least like a month to a couple of months of consistent playing. And once you're able to beat something like 9 Circles is pretty much being able to beat the difficulty of an entire hard video game. And then you just keep moving up. So by the time you're able to beat Supersonic and Insane Demons, easy demons become actually easy demons. Once you hit Cataclysm, that's like a real life good challenge. Those are like platinum trophies in hard games, or like being able to cheese through a really hard game. Like that's the difficulty Cataclysm is. And then you have Bloodbath, which is significantly harder than Cataclysm. This is most people's long-term goal, and everything after Bloodbath is just extra and just like ridiculously whimsically hard. But Bloodbath is pretty much everybody's dream level, And beating Bloodbath, I said it's like beating the hardest Mario Maker levels. I think it's like being able to pick up Mario Maker one day and then working your way up to being able to beat the levels from like a Little Curbs video. I think like Trials of Death is way harder. So I shouldn't have said hardest Mario Maker levels, but you guys get the point. And that's going to take close to a year to do if you're serious about the game. And then once you get past Bloodbath, it's just like extra, you know? The word hard starts to mean less. As you can see, Yatagarasu is about thrice as hard as Bloodbath. And if you can beat Yatagarasu, then beating Bloodbath is like no big deal at all. Like it's not that hard anymore. And then you keep moving up, and then it gets to a point where you hit Bloodlust. And once you hit Bloodlust, I don't think there's like a developer-made game with developer-made challenges that are even remotely close to it. It's more like picking up the controller one day and going from being a noob at a Call of Duty game and then being a real-life professional that makes money. Like that's the skill difference that we're at. On paper, if we're going based on these rankings, just to give you an idea, Bloodlust is about 9 times harder than Bloodbath on paper. And Bloodbath is already something that's like a super hard challenge. I'd say it would take most people who are serious about the game at least 6 months to beat. Of course, if you're starting as a beginner, and that's a low ball. But then you have like recent list demons like Zodiac, something twice as hard as Bloodlust. Like, just think about it, twice as hard as Bloodlust. And it's like, you can say that the levels are hard, but like, what does the word hard mean anymore? Like, Bloodbath is hard, Cataclysm is hard, then you have Zodiac that's like 18 times harder than Bloodbath. Like, you can't really fathom that. And those are in the extended list of our list, so not even in the top 75 anymore. Then you have Tartarus, the Golden, Swai. Those are like the low end of the list, like barely scraping into the top 75. And then you have Slaughterhouse, which like is so hard that people outside of the Geometry Dash community would react to it for content. Like XQC, IShowSpeed, like they've all seen Slaughterhouse, and it's just like, what the fuck is going on? And then when that level reigned as top 1, you had a lot of people who took over 100,000 tries to beat it, and one that even took like 500,000. But it's really nothing compared to like Silent Clubstep, Acheron 2.1, which just completely outclasses Slaughterhouse. And again, it's like you can't really fathom how hard that is. And it's like you can say that to the average person, but they're not gonna know what you mean. It's like comparing space objects, like the sun versus like Sirius or something. It's like, oh, okay, like you can tell me that this is twice as hard as this, but you can't really fathom the actual scale. For instance, Slaughterhouse is about 60 times harder than Bloodbath on paper and is almost 7 times harder than Bloodlust. And then you have Acheron, which is allegedly twice as hard as Slaughterhouse, if not more. And then you have Tidal Wave, which is twice as hard as Acheron, if not more. And then you have like Amethyst, which is a bit harder than Tidal Wave. And then you have Grief, which is almost twice as hard as Tidal Wave. So you can see these little bars that I made, but okay, let's look at Grief. That's almost twice as hard as something that I told you was twice as hard as something that I told you was twice as hard as something that I told you was 60 times harder than Bloodbath, which is a challenge that would take most people from half a year to a year to beat if they're serious. That's how hard Geometry Dash is, ladies and gentlemen. Hold on, you thought it was over? I'm gonna go over the currently impossible levels. Geometry Dash is an ever so growing game where the skill ceiling only furthers as time goes on. It will not stop until the game dies, which right now there are no signs of it doing. But the theoretical limit of the game is much different than the actual current limit of it. We refer to the hardest level in the game as the hardest legitimately beaten level, but that doesn't mean that there aren't levels that exist that are even harder, because there are. Meet the impossible levels list. The impossible levels list ranges from levels around the difficulty of the hardest in the game. Some are actually easier, it's just that no one has gone for them. But of course, the bulk of the list is composed of levels harder than those legitimately beaten. Enter Eternus. Eternus is the unofficial sequel to Acheron and is the hardest Riot level in the Tartarus, Acheron, and Eternus series. Again, it is a Riot project that is currently in open verification, which is meant to be the hardest level in the game in the coming years. It is way above the difficulty of anything legitimately beaten currently, and is probably the most relevant impossible list level right now. With 211 60 FPS frame perfects and 78 120 FPS frame perfects in a level that is under a minute and a half, you can kind of get an idea of how difficult it is, but not even top players can comprehend its difficulty right now to a reliable degree. It is made with the intent that no one can currently beat it, but someday someone will be able to. Riot wants the completion of this project to look somewhat like Silent Club Steps being deemed impossible, and then players slowly making more and more progress on it as time goes on. Speaking of Silent Club Step, Silent Club Star is a super buffed version of Silent Club Step, and based on its placement on the impossible levels list, you can say it's the Bloodlust to Bloodbath of Silent Club Step. At least with Eternus, it is estimated that someday someone will be able to beat it. With Silent Club Star, that's unlikely to be the case. Being an uglier, meaner, and scarier version of Silent Club Step, Silent Club Star rates almost 180 levels harder than Eternus. What's even harder than Silent Club Star is a popular level called Silent Circles. Silent Circles is another popular impossible list level made by creators Cyrillic and Silent, the guy who made Silent Club Step. It became super popular due to its gameplay being just blatantly impossible. I mean, look at this. You literally have to be a robot to beat this level. So Jamshid's progeny, as I've gone over, Zoink, who's verified Acheron and Tidal Wave, the current #1 ranked player and the player who's widely accepted as the best player in Jamshid right now, spent almost an hour completing this level in practice mode. And that's actually the world record. Despite this, there are over 30 levels that are said to be harder than this. The hardest impossible level in the game is tax evasion. Rated #1 on the impossible levels list is tax evasion. Difficult isn't even a word to accurately describe this level. There's currently no one on this earth who can beat tax evasion, and there never will be anybody on this earth that can beat tax evasion. It's gonna take Jesus Christ himself. I mean, look at this. It's just not possible. Like, at all. The difference between Stereo Madness and Tidal Wave is less than the difference between Tidal Wave and tax evasion. It's like comparing a Google years to forever. Remember Tidal Wave having 260 FPS frame perfects? Remember Eternus having 211 60 FPS frame perfects and 78 120 FPS frame perfects? Well, tax evasion has 640 1,440 FPS frame perfects, meaning that it's basically not possible on a monitor that can theoretically produce 1,440 frames per second. That is absolutely, I mean, like I said, difficult isn't even a word that you can use to describe. Okay, so now that we've gone over the difficulty scale of Jamshid, let's go over some mind-blowing facts about the game and what people have achieved. This is the difficulty of Deadlocked. There's a rated level which is deadlocked but completely invisible, named, obviously, Invisible Deadlocked. And it's not even an extreme demon. That means the hardest main level in the entire game, when completely invisible, becomes invisible when looking at the scale of difficulty of the actual game. Way back when, Andromeda released the top 10 hardest Jamshid videos. This was before Bloodbath was released. At #2 was Cataclysm, and #1 was Silent Club Step. Here's the difference between Cataclysm and Silent Club Step. So, is the difference between Stereo Madness and Bloodbath greater than Bloodbath and our current hardest level in the game? Let's find out. So obviously we're just going off of our determinations of level difficulty, and this first half is pretty much on me. So Bloodbath on paper is about 344 times harder than Stereo Madness. Yeah, I think that's pretty fair considering Bloodbath is like a real life hard challenge and Stereo Madness is a couple of spike jumps essentially that I've witnessed my 3-year-old cousin beat. This is based on my determination, and the next one is going to be obviously more so determined by Denny, and he said that obviously it's not like completely accurate, but he felt like he did a good job with determining how much harder each level was than the other, just how I thought I did a pretty good job with this ranking. And of course the feels like difficulty is something different than the actual on paper difficulty. So for instance, I'd say like Bloodbath is probably about 344 times harder than Stereo Madness, but then of course it's going to be different to person, which is why the feels like is different. For instance, Yatagarasu might not feel 3 times harder than Bloodbath if they say, for instance, already beat Sonic Wave or have a bunch of experience or are just really good at the game. It's not going to feel like that difference, even though the difference is there. Which brings us to this other ranking, starting at Bloodbath. That little dot right there, that's Bloodbath. That little dot is harder than a Souls game, mind you. That little dot is harder than Cuphead. That little dot is harder than Super Meat Boy. So that's just to give you some perspective. To the right of that is Yatagarasu. To the right of Yata is Sonic Wave. To the right of Sonic Wave is Bloodlust. To the right of Bloodlust is Zodiac. To the right of Zodiac is Tartarus. And I think you guys can see it as we zoom out here. So I'm just going to stop right here real quick. A lot of people said the aforementioned question that we're trying to answer before Acheron even came out. And I'm just going to say no, right? The difference between the hardest Extreme Demon and Bloodbath is not greater than the distance between Stereo Madness and Bloodbath. A lot of people really underestimate, especially people who are very good at the game and who can beat Bloodbath like within the blink of an eye, really underestimate the difference between Stereo Madness and Bloodbath. I think that's because it also takes longer to climb from like a level like Slaughterhouse from Bloodbath, from like Stereo Madness and Bloodbath. Like you can do Stereo Madness to Bloodbath in like a year. Bloodbath to Slaughterhouse is probably gonna take a lot more than a year. But if anything, that just goes to show how hard Bloodbath is, and it's because there's multiple steps involved. Like, in order to go from Slaughterhouse to Bloodbath, you'd probably have to beat something like Bloodlust, which is already several times harder than Bloodbath. You have to probably from there go to Zodiac, and then Tartarus, you know what I mean? So I understand why that point sort of became popular, but even if you're looking at Acheron versus Bloodbath, it's not true. Acheron on paper is 180 times harder than Bloodbath, while Bloodbath was 344 times harder than Stereo Madness on paper. And even if you think these estimates are complete bullshit, or I'm not a top player, so who am I to talk? Like, if there's one thing in common, we're all humans, and the human experience is similar enough to where the discrepancies between someone else's opinion isn't going to change this fact to the degree in where I would be wrong in this case. Cocky sounding, I know, but like, let's take, for instance, someone other than Denny. Let's say that they say that these rankings are wrong, and let's say that their opinion is like an aggregate of everybody else's opinion. So let's say that that's the case. I'd say like the difference in terms of how off we could be would only be anywhere from like 10 to 20%. Not like 60 to 70% margin of error to where the difference between Acheron and Bloodbath suddenly is greater than the difference between Bloodbath and Stereo Madness. That's what I'm saying. I hope I made sense. If not, you can hit me in Discord and I'll try to explain it there. The feels like difficulty might be greater, but in terms of like the actual difficulty of the levels, people highly underestimate the difference between Stereo Madness and Bloodbath. That being said, it's not until we hit Tidal Wave to where that becomes true, where Tidal Wave is about 360 times harder than Bloodbath, while Bloodbath is 344 times harder than Stereo Madness. So the answer to this question is yes, but only if you're referring to Tidal Wave and levels harder than Tidal Wave. The difference between Bloodbath and Tidal Wave is greater than the difference between Bloodbath and Stereo Madness. The number one player in the actual game of Geometry Dash, not the number one ranked player, but the number one Geometry Dash player, aka the player who has collected the most stars, is Mr. Spaghetti. With a total of 325,000 stars and with over 8,000 demon levels beaten, the hardest level they have ever beaten is Zodiac. This is how Zodiac compares to the hardest levels in the game. For reference, arguably the best player in the game currently, W Popoff, beat Zodiac in under a week. Speaking of which, the other best player in the game and most popular top player, Zoink, kickstarted his career by beating Zodiac as a jump from Bloodbath. Here's the difference between Bloodbath and Zodiac. Now, he had done achievements harder than Bloodbath, but in terms of actually completing a level, this was the jump, and was at the time considered the largest jump in Geometry Dash history. Speaking of which, the biggest jump or progression skip that I could find in terms of actually completing 2 levels is by Hades, who jumped from 9 circles to Sakupin circles. Here's the difference between those two. And I don't know if we've gone over, but Sakupin Circles is a level basically as hard as Slaughterhouse. That means Hades went from beating an easy demon to a current top 20 demon, which was a top 10 demon at the time. Sakupin Circles actually had a couple of months where it was considered the hardest level in the game. It took Hades over a year and 670,000 attempts to make this monumental jump. Speaking of jumps, Player Vision, with over 800,000 attempts, made a jump from Black Blizzard all the way to Silent Clubstep. Black Blizzard is in what I consider the hard stuff in terms of level difficulty, which means it's harder than Phobos, Bloodbath, but easier than Yatagarasu, Sonic Wave, and Bloodlust. Codependence is a 2-player extreme demon and the hardest one of its type in the game. Some people take on the task of beating it solo, basically controlling 2 different game modes with 2 completely different sets of obstacles intended for 2 different players to do all by themselves. It's essentially beating 2 completely different levels at the same time. Either of these levels are hard enough to be an extreme demon on their own, yet people are crazy enough to do them at the same time. The whole entire experience is currently a top 40 level, meaning this unreal challenge isn't even in the top 10, top 20, or top 30 hardest levels in the game. It took W Popoff 115,000 attempts and 3.5 months to beat the current top 1, Amethyst. This is after he beat Tidal Wave 3 times, Acheron over 11 times, and Slaughterhouse over 100 times. Now we're going to compare Geometry Dash with other games. A popular game that is often compared to Geometry Dash are the Max Mode challenges of Five Nights at Freddy's.
So how hard is Hopeless Pursuit? Well, you could take pretty much every FNAF challenge that I've ever done, and compared to HP, they mean literally nothing. FNAF Lock, Rat and Cat All challenges, 1 million fast rating in FNAF 6, 4 games at once, 6 hour 420, they aren't even a speck compared to the monster of HP.
This is because some prominent FNAF Max Mode players are also members of the GD community. It offers similar experiences of providing a challenge so hard and demanding that it breaks the player's mind, forcing them to spend thousands of attempts on a single challenge. Although a bit different fundamentally, I wanted to know the difference between FNAF Max Mode and Geometry Dash, especially since its player base was intertwined. Now, if you don't know how hard FNAF Max Mode challenges are, take a look at this video describing the second hardest challenge, or the top 2, Hopeless Pursuit. In this same video, Bones created an even harder challenge than the current top 1, FNAF Max Mode challenge, called Hopeless Greed. I noticed that one of the first victors of Hopeless Greed was also a really good Geometry Dash player, beating levels like Tartarus. Now, Hopeless Greed is a challenge that is harder than the top 1, Ultimatum, with its victors commonly being able to beat Hopeless Pursuit, which is the top 2, multiple times in a row. It's also stated that Ultimatum isn't all that much harder than Hopeless Pursuit. When asked which game is harder, Almohadales, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, arguably the best FNAF Max Mode player, responded with 2 words: GD harder. I'll put the top Max Mode level around Zodiac difficulty, as Almohadales' hardest level is Tartarus, and they stated that Geometry Dash is the harder game, so I'm sure they were going off of their own personal experience. Freddy also stated that Ultimatum is around Shardscape's difficulty, and Shardscapes is a level that's harder than Bloodlust but easier than Zodiac, and it's closer to Bloodlust than it is to Zodiac. So I think it checks out that Hopeless Greed, which is a top 1, a decent chunk harder than Ultimatum, is a little bit closer to Zodiac, but probably not quite as hard. I also see people being able to beat Max Mode list levels after a year to a year and a half of grinding from 50-20. which 50-20 is kind of like a medium demon when compared to Geometry Dash's difficulty. I don't see anyone being able to go from medium demon to list demon in a year to a year and a half. I don't care how good that player ends up being. For reference, Zoink and W Popoff have been playing the game for over 5 years. So I think Rocket League skill ceiling is higher than the FNAF Max Mode list skill ceiling. So I'm gonna put it around Godlike in terms of the list that I made for Geometry Dash difficulty, which means that the upper limit of skill ceiling right now for Rocket League would be somewhere around the difficulty of being able to beat Tartar or the Golden in Geometry Dash. Rocket League is considered one of the highest skill ceiling esports games. It easily takes thousands of hours of mastering the mechanics and gaining consistency. I, however, think that Geometry Dash easily has a higher skill ceiling simply because by the time Rocket League came out, we were already pushing the skill ceiling of Geometry Dash. Cataclysm was already a level which to this day is an extreme demon, a level I think most people would need at least a year of consistent playing in order to reach the skill threshold to beat. You also need unique mechanics to play Geometry Dash at the highest level, which is the common argument for what makes Rocket League such a hard game to go pro in. Straight fly, for instance, is a mechanic. Wave spam is a mechanic. Really, any distinct click pattern that shows up as a concept across levels is what I consider a mechanic, and there are thousands of them in Geometry Dash. And the thing is that you can have a mechanic or concept in Geometry Dash, and then it can be made 10 times harder depending on the specific level that you're playing. I understand that Rocket League had a predecessor that came out before Geometry Dash, but if we use that logic, we would have to bring up the Impossible game, which came out before Rocket League's predecessor. I think Rocket League and League of Legends, you know, it's very hard to compare a game like that to a game like Geometry Dash because they're multiplayer games and team-based games and you have to react to certain situations. But in terms of skill ceiling, I'm going to comfortably put forth the claim that Geometry Dash has a higher skill ceiling than both of those games. This is based on the research that I've done, so if anybody, you know, has played both games and can offer an opinion, let me know in the comment section down below where you would place games like Rocket League or League of Legends compared to Geometry Dash. And again, this is based on skill ceiling, so skill floor versus the skill ceiling. It's not, oh, I played Rocket League and Rocket League was harder for me, or I played Geometry Dash and Geometry Dash is harder than for me. It's more of like, what's the skill ceiling and how high is it compared to the other games. So the skill ceiling versus the skill floor in a game like Fortnite and Apex Legends, I think is pretty high. I'm actually someone who has played Fortnite a lot and is mechanically above average. I heard that Apex Legends has the same skill ceiling as Fortnite, if not a little bit harder, which to me personally, I think it's a little hard to believe. I'm not too big on Apex Legends, so it may be the case, but like looking at the skill floor and I'm looking at today's pros, and that's pretty wide. And Fortnite has been out for longer than Apex Legends has, and it's more mechanically complex. Yes, even with the movement of Apex Legends. But if Apex's skill ceiling is higher, then whatever. But for right now, I'm putting both Fortnite and Apex Legends at the same in terms of skill ceiling. But circling back to my own personal experience, I'm personally someone who very much understands the skill ceiling of Fortnite. And honestly, I don't think it's grown that much ever since Chapter 3. I played the most in Chapter 1 and in Chapter 2, and the skill difference between a pro in Chapter 1 and a pro in Chapter 2 is very high. So high, in fact, that it's something you can visually see. In Chapter 3, it looks like a pro player from Chapter 2, just that the building is more consistent and the aiming is a lot better. Nowadays, versus a pro from Chapter 3, it looks pretty much the same, just people are a little bit faster and more polished. Also, I've seen a Chapter 2 FNCS champion who stopped playing in Chapter 3 hop back onto the game and completely shit on tryhards from today. I just don't think that games like Call of Duty, Apex Legends, or Fortnite has the same skill ceiling as a game like Geometry Dash, which is why I put them where I did. Of course, it's hard to compare two completely different kinds of games, but as someone who is good at Fortnite, I don't think it compares that well to Geometry Dash. And by the time Fortnite came out, Bloodlust was a level. Let's take a look at the Souls games. The Souls games are notorious for being brutal and unforgiving in terms of their gameplay and difficulty. People who play these games are commonly referred to as masochists who have too much time on their hands. A lot of normal gamers are turned away from Souls games due to the sheer brutality and difficulty of them. So, how does it compare to Geometry Dash? Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, as someone who's picked up Sekiro, one of the harder Souls games, and no, I haven't beaten it, but I do have a good enough idea on the difficulty of it. I don't think it stacks to Geometry Dash as much as some people are going to think. So Souls games are just normal action-adventure games that are really hard, and to be honest, that's all they are. Yes, you're gonna need a lot of time and skill and determination, but to compare it to something like a FNAF Max Mode list level or an Extreme Demon in Geometry Dash, it's just not a good comparison. At the end of the day, Souls games are made by hundreds of developers who prioritize level design, game progression, enemy design, and things of that sort. You're not going to run into a mind-breaking challenge which will push the limits of your determination and it'll leave you standing on that one challenge for hundreds, if not thousands of hours. So I only have Sekiro to go off of, and that's one of the harder Souls games, and I'm going to put that at around hard demon difficulty, and I think that's pretty generous. The last game I'll go over is chess, which is said to be just the highest skill ceiling game of all time. And personally, I agree. Chess has been around for thousands of years. The highest rated player is Magnus Carlsen, who's been playing for over 30 years. It takes a special kind of mind to master chess at the level of today's top level grandmasters. But this puts the conversation in an interesting position. If I told a beginner chess player to sit down and beat a level like Tidal Wave, I think it would take them longer to beat Tidal Wave than it would to beat Magnus Carlsen in a game of chess. But I think it would take a similar amount of time, if not longer, to master chess than it would Geometry Dash for the average person. This, however, depends on what we call a quote-unquote master. I think becoming a grandmaster at chess is like beating Acheron in Geometry Dash. And I think being as good as someone like Magnus Carlsen would be like beating Eternus. Because ratings don't mean too much. When Chess.com's #1 player played against the #2 player, Grandmaster Hikaru, Magnus said that he was quote-unquote decent. I mean, he's given him a lot more credit ever since then, I will admit. Chess.com is a whole different can of worms. I think Chess.com is easier to become a grandmaster in than climbing the entire difficulty scale of Geometry Dash. But with chess, the actual game, chess, I do think that that has a higher skill ceiling than Geometry Dash. So guys, I hope you enjoyed. This was a pretty big video. Definitely bigger than what I anticipated. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. I think my next big video will be me tearing apart the Call of Duty franchise, so make sure you guys look out for that. So hopefully you guys enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section down below, and peace out. Have a great rest of your day.
Thought it was done, nigga. Not yet, nigga.
Alright, so you guys made it to the end of the video. Now we're just going to be going over the official rankings of all the levels that we've gone over, just in case anybody's curious. And so obviously, if you're watching this like a year later, the rankings that will be displayed here is going to be totally inaccurate. Levels will swap, there'll be levels in between. You know, the hardest level now isn't going to be the hardest level a year from now, so just keep that in mind. But if you're watching this, this was taken in late October, so this shouldn't jump around too much from when we actually post the video. So right now, Thinking Space 2 is the hardest level in the game, the hardest verified level. Amethyst is #2. Now, the interesting thing about this, and I'll probably end up doing a video about it in the future, is that there are two different versions of Amethyst, one with CBF and one without CBF. And the verifier of Amethyst, W. Popov, who at the time of this recording has significant progress in Thinking Space 2, says that Amethyst is a decent amount harder than Thinking Space 2, the version that he verified at least. But the version of CBF Amethyst is easier than Thinking Space 2, which is why Thinking Space 2 is at 1, Amethyst is at 2. You have Flame Wall at 3, above Tidal Wave, which is currently at 4. Flame Wall could be harder, could be easier, but just the only person that had good enough progress on it was Trick, the first victor of Tidal Wave, and he gave it the benefit of the doubt and said that it was harder than Tidal Wave. Then you have the lower end of the top 10. So Silent Clubstep, as we have gone over. Avernus, I use this in the background. And what else did I use in the background? I use Kiyuki in the background. It's the real cool level, in case you guys are wondering. So those are those levels. The thing about Acheron is that, again, kind of like Amethyst, CBF brought down its difficulty. But the difference is that there are kind of two versions of Amethyst. There's only one version of Acheron. And so after 2.2, as you guys heard Denny talk about in the video, Acheron just got nerfed. But the 2.1 Acheron is about Anathema difficulty, harder than Silent Clubstep. So about Anathema, probably easier than Andromeda, but people compare it to Anathema or Anathema if you want to pronounce it technically. Then you have Slaughterhouse at number 20. This was very recent, so it's on the back end of the top 20 now. Sukupen Circles, 22. We went over that briefly, and we're just going down the list. As you can see, you have the Golden at 71. So the list, the top 75 is the main list. Once you get past that, it's the extended list. So the Golden is number 71, so it's almost out of the main list. And then if you go up a little bit, Tartarus is 62. It's definitely climbing down, but a couple years back, obviously these were all the hardest levels in the game. And you can even go on Time Machine to see that, but we won't. And then you have Kinos at 86 and Zodiac at 96, which is funny because for the longest time, Kinos and Zodiac were right next to each other on the list. Now, more and more levels are obviously in between the two, and people are calling it the divorce. We're at 150, and as you can see, that's the entire demon list. Anything beyond that would be the legacy list. So now we're going to go to the all rated extreme, and we have to search for them now. So Bloodlust is top 173. So yeah, a ways away from the main list now. Now you have Sonic Wave, which is 275. So now we're just plunging down the list. So Yatagarasu is 284, very close to Sonic Wave. And then Erebus is even further down at number 315. And then you have Artificial Ascent, which is at number 403. So over 400 levels, that's harder than a level that's twice as hard as Bloodbath. And I'm actually working on this level right now. And yeah, it's pretty tough, I'll say that. And then you have Phobos, which is currently my second hardest level. This is my current hardest level right here. But this is my second hardest, Phobos. A bit harder than Bloodbath, but as you can see, almost in the top 600. And Sukupen Hell shouldn't be too much further down. Yep, so Sukupen Hell is 599, literally right above that top 600 spot. Which is crazy. And so yeah, obviously when I recorded the video, I recorded this video months ago, so these levels, when I beat them, they're at like 540 something. I think Phobos was 541 when I beat it, so moving 50 spots down, you know, obviously the easier levels are going to move down or a lot more drastically than the harder levels. And then Bloodbath is actually pretty far away from Sukupen Hell at 660. So Bloodbath, there are 659 levels harder than Bloodbath. And Bloodbath, as I've said several times, is like a real life tough challenge. It's most people's like big goal, long-term goal, I'd say it takes like, if we're going off of like 6 months to a year, I'd say it would take more people closer to a year than it would 6 months. Like, I've seen new players, you know, come in and they're able to do Bloodbath like within that good 8-month, you know, kind of time frame if they're being objective. I say like at least a year to 2 years because most people play this game casually, so they're not always playing like a new hardest level. Like, they're not always playing like a level strictly to get better at the game. You know, a lot of people like go on and star grind and have a lot of fun on this game. So yeah, here's how much easier Cataclysm is than Bloodbath. So Bloodbath was at 660, Cataclysm is at 1179. So yeah, it's like these are the beginner extremes, right? Like anything here, these are beginner extremes. Like Niwa, like these are the easier extremes, right? And then if you want to really check and see how hard these levels are, Ice Carbon Diablo X isn't even on this list. Yeah, so just think about that. Ice Carbon Diablo X, which is like easily harder than a Souls game, isn't even like within the top 1000 Geometry Dash levels, and it moves up exponentially, you know. But yeah, that's just the rankings, and I thought you guys would be interested in seeing that after seeing like the whole difficulty scale. But hey, if you guys enjoyed the video, thank you so much, and I will catch you guys on the next one.